You guys want another sound check?
Yeah, they should get one. Hang on a second.
Sure. So Clark, I'm gonna ask you a question, they'll probably cut you off halfway, there's no check the sound. Been on vacation lately? Are you going anywhere?
No vacations lately and no plans to.
No plans?
So, no.
When's the last vacation you had?
Oh, it's been a few years, probably Disneyland a couple of years ago.
Disneyland?
Yeah.
Kids and all?
Kids and all.
Yeah, how was that? Is that why you haven't
It was
been on
fun. No,
another
it's
vacation?
we're due for another one, so
Yeah.
they've been asking.
Oh, that's
So.
good. All right. Ready to go? Okay. So Clerk, I think like Mark had mentioned, we're going to start off with, if you could just give us your name, current position in the department, your role on the Placerville project, and the time period at which that occurred.
Okay. My name's Clark Peri. I'm a project manager with District 3. I'm a senior transportation engineer and am currently and was the project manager on the Placerville Operational Improvement Project. My primary time frame for the project management on that project was from construction, basically from the end of PS&E through the end of construction.
Good. Mark? Good. All right, so here we go. What advice would you give to a new PE?
My advice to a new PE would be don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to take a leadership role in your projects. The PDT is relying on your leadership and your direction to provide what they need for the project.
Good. How would you define the PE's role and responsibility?
Well, the PE's role and responsibility is basically to develop the plan, specifications, and estimate of the project. That's the end product that the PE is responsible for. Your role is to get as much information that you need from other functions to help develop that PS&E package. So you're responsible for getting that information and getting the information to the functions so that they can get the information back to you.
Great. What criteria do you use to evaluate the success of a project?
Well, as a project manager, the criteria that I use to label a project a success is, does it meet the purpose and need that it was intended to meet? Is the project, was it delivered within budget, and was it delivered on time with the schedule? Those are the key factors for any project to label it as a success. And if you meet those goals, then more than likely you'll have a successful project.
Okay. You good there, Mark? What makes an effective PDT?
An effective PDT needs communication. That is the #1 item for any PDT. Everybody on that team needs to be able to communicate clearly, honestly, what their needs are and what they need to produce the product that they need to produce. Everybody on the team relies on one another for information and different products to get to that end result, whether it be a PS&E package or a project report or a PID document. So the key is to communicate and understand what everybody else needs and what your needs are, and be able to communicate your needs to the team.
Great. What advice would you give a PE about how to participate in an effective PDT?
Well, again, the advice I would give to a PE to effectively participate in a PDT would be communication. Don't be afraid to let the functions know what your needs are, what products you need, what information you need. Again, you're responsible for that PS&E package or a project report or whatever that end product might be. And in order to produce that, you need information from other functional units that are represented on the PDT. So if you need to be able to communicate your needs to them, they need to be able to communicate their needs to you so that everything can come together when it needs to. So the key there is communication, #1.
Great, that's great. In general, how would you recommend that a PE facilitate communication among the PDT?
I would recommend that a PE facilitate communication any way possible, whether it's email, phone call, face-to-face meetings. It just depends whatever works best for the team. Email works great, but sometimes you can't put as much detail into an email that you need to. So a face-to-face meeting will work. Don't wait for a monthly PDT meeting to happen. Take the initiative to pull together a focus meeting with just the functions that are needed to come to a consensus or a decision on a particular item. Communicate with your project manager what's needed. If you're not getting a response from other PDT members, let the project manager know that the schedule may slip if you don't get a decision on a particular item. Again, phone conferences work well in order to pull together a meeting quick, but whatever works for you and the PDT, make it work. Don't just sit back and let people come to you.
What advice would you give a new PE about evaluating work done by someone else?
The advice I'd give to a PE about evaluating work done by others is don't reinvent the wheel. Your role there is to review their work. Their professional credentials are similar to yours, and they've got reasons why they made the decisions that they made. Not that you can't question those. Certainly communication there again is key if you've got questions on a particular item. But don't try to change what another engineer or something else designed by somebody else has done, because there are decisions based on their design, and you may not agree with them, but there was a reason for that. So if you have any questions, ask the folks that made that design or created that document that you're reviewing.
What advice would you give a new PE about how to balance scope, schedule, cost, and quality?
Well, the advice that I would give a new PE on balancing scope, cost, schedule, and quality is you've got to be able to know the effects of the others when you're changing one. Anything any change of scope of work will cause some kind of change to the cost, whether it's a reduction or an increase. Depending on the amount of that, it may affect the schedule, which may affect the cost as well. All four parameters have to kind of come together at some point. You can't change one without affecting at least one or two of the others. Communicate those changes to the project manager, who's ultimately responsible for the budget. Not only the schedule budget, but also the cost. Don't act in a vacuum. Don't just make decisions on your own. Make sure you communicate any changes that are needed to the PDT before anything's finalized, because you may not have the whole picture of the project and what the entire goal of the project is, so you've got to bring in your other team members to take a look at those.
Okay. How important is the local community on any project?
It's extremely important. The local community is extremely important because more and more there's local agencies and local planning agencies that have control of a certain amount of money for their projects, and the days are gone when CalTrans can just go in and do work on a state highway portion and not have to discuss with anybody what we're doing. The locals have money and they have a stake in everything we do out there. If there's not local money involved in a project, there's effect on the community from a construction standpoint, from a traffic flow standpoint, and you've got to be able to communicate those changes or those goals with the local community. And a lot of times their local communities are having more and more of a say and a voice in our projects, so the quicker you can pull them in to a project, the better, because if there's a scope of work that they've got concern about or constructability issues that they're concerned about, you need to know those as soon as possible. And you also need to keep them in the loop on progress on the project as it goes through development.
What advice would you give to a PE coming in late on a project, and are there any strategies in particular that you would recommend?
Advice I would give to a PE coming in late to a project is, 1, don't reinvent the wheel, and 2, ask a lot of questions. Depending on when you come into a project, there's already decisions that have been made previously, and you may not agree with those decisions, or you may have another way of doing things, but the project might be at a point where you're not able to make those changes without affecting your cost or your schedule or some other parameter, as we discussed earlier. Some strategies, again, don't reinvent the wheel. If you've got a proposed change from a previous decision that's been made, communicate that with your senior and also with the project manager and the other PDT members. Take the time to read the documents that have been produced up to the point where you receive the project. If possible, have a transition meeting with the former project engineer. That would be a very good source to bring yourself up to speed and get some history on the project and some of the reasons for decisions that were made to date.
How did the PM and the PW work together on the Placerville project post PS&E?
This is on the Placerville project?
Placerville.
Okay. Regarding the Placerville project, the project manager and the project engineer worked together post PS&E very closely. That particular project, as I came on board as a project manager right after PS&E and before construction started. So I didn't have a lot of the history on that project, so I relied on the project engineer to bring me up to speed on some of the outstanding issues that still needed to be resolved, and some of the the scope of the project, because there were so many different things on that project. It was very key to sit down with the project engineer and focus on some of those issues that were problems with the project and that needed to be handled before construction and during construction.
Please describe what you would consider the critical path elements on the Placerville project, and which of those elements was the most important?
Well, some of the critical path elements on the Placerville project were constructability. During the design phase, I wasn't involved at that time. However, I know meeting with the city, there was some critical issues regarding the sewer line. As we were going through determining what the scope of work needed to be on the 3 local bridges there, it was discovered that we had a sewer line that was in conflict with those. So we had to bring the city on board to help us with the decisions on the scope of work at that point. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. You want to start over?
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure can.
I've got more to say.
What you would consider the critical path elements of the Placerville project, and which of those elements would you consider most important?
Yeah, in addition to the sewer line, there were also things regarding the traffic flow throughout the city, the effect on the city on Main Street. There's a lot of businesses on Main Street that were affected by construction. So critical path items, for one, the sewer during design. During construction was really staging of the project. The hard rock that we ran into, that was a critical path item, as it delayed construction to a certain extent until a resolution could be determined on what direction to go. The thing about any project is your critical path items will change. Once you've handled a critical path item and taken it off the critical path, there's a new item that will come up that is on critical path.
That's great. That good, Mark? You're good? Good. That, we haven't had that piece, that was nice.
Was that okay?
Yeah, no, it was great.
Sorry.
Yeah, especially as, making the point of how the critical path element changes, right? You've got this, solve it, next.
Something
Yeah,
else
that was
comes
nice,
up,
nice
exactly.
How would you describe the level of communication on your team, and did it change over time?
The level of communication on the project, on the Placerville sorry, let me start over.
Sure.
The level of communication on the Placerville operational project, in my opinion, was good. It did change over time, primarily because there was different PDT members along the way. During design, you had the standard project development team that helped develop the PS&E, the project report and the PS&E. When I came on board during construction, my primary point of communication was with the project engineer, but I did have to discuss items with the city and make sure they were kept on board. And there were other functional folks that I needed to communicate with. For one, to bring myself up to speed on the project, and also to make sure we were able to get to the next step to fund the project and any changes there prior to award. In my opinion, the communication was good on that project, but there's always room for improvement. And as I look back now, I would have done some things differently to improve that.
Do you want to add that now? Things you have done?
I can throw in some things there. I at the time, and looking back on it now, I would have continued to hold PDT meetings at least for a few months after the project was allocated the construction funds, and at least into the start of construction, to keep up to speed on the issues that needed to be resolved and not to lose sight of those. Typically, once the PS&E package is done, the PDT kind of disbands, at least from a formal standpoint, and any changes at that point are handled, one-on-one between either the project manager and the project engineer, or the project engineer and another function, depending on the issue. If I was able to keep that PDT, or if I'd have kept that PDT together through the start of construction, I think it would have made for an easier construction period and faster resolution of some of the issues that we ran into.
Good. We want to do a change now. We're going to cut to the white shot, right?
Deborah has to come back from here.
I'm not following you.
Deborah settled first.
So I'm going to do 3 questions from over here, Clark. So
Okay.
I'm going to change your gaze a bit.
Let's just move the chair more this way so that you're behind that camera. I'll move this this way. Yeah. Then you can stand back. And let me adjust. How does this camera look? Okay? Hello? Okay, now should I refocus it, or you think he's good? Okay, good. Very good.
All right, here we go. What were the major factors that contributed to the change in cost estimate over the project?
Some of the major factors that contributed to the cost estimate over the life of the project was, number one, the sewer line. I don't believe that was anticipated until or discovered until the design was started and we realized the conflict. So there were additional costs involved with that, just because it wasn't included in the original project. other items that came into play primarily during construction were the discovery of hazardous waste at a particular site that we didn't realize had it. It was an old gas station that apparently had been, to our knowledge at the time, had been cleaned up until construction started. They were grading out there and discovered contaminated soil. So we had to go in at that point and find all the contaminated soil, remove it, put in good soil, and we ended up having to monitor the ground for quite a while before we realized it was cleaned up. So that cut into our contingency funds in the very early on in the project, which made it difficult to manage that throughout the construction. The discovery of hard rock during construction also contributed to additional costs. There was an on-ramp to eastbound Route 50 that they found hard rock, and after several days of trying to break it up and the contractor using different methods and different equipment to come in, we decided to redesign the profile of that ramp, which created additional costs on the design side to have to go back and do a contract change order. That fed into changes on the drainage side at that location, which created increased costs as well. There was also an increase because of the changes there. There was an increase to our support costs on the construction side. You know, it required additional work to monitor what was going on out there, and with the change order, that was a sizable change order that we had to add as well. So.
What were the major factors that contributed to the change in schedule over the course of the project?
Some of the factors that contributed to a change in schedule over the course of the project were, again, the sewer line. That was when that was discovered that there was additional time needed to create utility agreements, cooperative agreements before that work could be done and move forward with a design on that. There were also, again, visiting the rock issue that delayed the contractor on the construction end, which created, I believe it was an additional year. There were other factors involved. There were contractor inefficiencies that created delays. There were items involved with the sewer line, the main trunk of the sewer line. There was hard rock discovered along that location that created some delays there too. And any delay in schedule typically will create a delay or an increase in cost.
What were the most significant hurdles in staging the Placerville project?
Some of the most significant hurdles in staging the project were primarily mainline Route 50 traffic. There, you know, we added an auxiliary lane and the sewer line was located underneath that. So you had mainline Route 50 to handle traffic staging. There's 3 signalized intersections along Route 50 that tie into or connect to local roads. So there's cross traffic coming across the 3 bridges that we widened or replaced that create staging issues as well. So you've got mainline issues, you've got local traffic circulation issues you're trying to resolve, and all that played into different staging that the contractor used and how he staged different parts of the project.
Good. All right, we're gonna shift back now.
Okay, shifting back. Yeah. Okay, I see. Okay, you gotta give us a minute here.
A lot of dancing going on in here.
Let's grab your cable, get your cable over there. Here, okay, like that.
Okay.
Shot look okay? Okay, good. Oh wait, hold on, let me just adjust your shirt real quick, I'll be right back. And then the camera? Okay, right back to there, but hold on.
Sorry, I shouldn't have moved, huh?
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. It just warmed up. It's just, I just saw, well, there you go. I think it's good. I think it's gonna be fine.
I think I'd like to ask it separately to marry it with the others and see, yeah. Susan?
I'm ready, I'm good. Yeah, I think I changed the shot though. Hang on. Does it look okay?
All right, what effect did the Hard Rock have on the project, and how were the Hard Rock issues resolved?
Well, the effect that the Hard Rock had on the Placerville project was, number one, delayed some work on the eastbound on-ramp to Route 50. The contractor tried several days to break it up once he discovered it, brought in different types of equipment. But there was a delay not only from discovery of Hard Rock and determining that it would take him quite a long time to get down to grade. Once the decision was made, it took time to make the decision to redesign the profile to not have to dig deeper than what was needed. So there was a delay there that not only to the contractor waiting for the change order to be prepared, but it also affected him to, prevented him from going on to other areas to continue on with work. The other part of that was there was discovery of Hard Rock along the sewer line, which I believe they were eventually able to cut through and get the sewer line to grade. But it took them longer than planned, which affects the schedule overall.
The decision was made to relocate the sewer as part of the project. What were the lessons learned from that decision?
Some of the lessons learned to relocate the sewer is if you have sewer in your project, find another project. No, we were able to work through those issues, but it took a lot of work with the city. It took some negotiation with the city. The sewer line, it was in conflict with the bridge abutments that we were doing on the local roads. And as we talked to the city about it and determined what the effect of that conflict was on us and on them, it turned out that we ended up paying 64% of the sewer relocation. And there was some apprehension about that because CalTrans is not in the business of relocating sewer lines. But nonetheless, it was a operational project that had this issue with it that we needed to resolve. So ultimately we had to get it out of the way, and the best resolution of that was to offer to help pay for the conflict areas that we felt were our responsibility. I didn't answer that completely, did I?
I wasn't going to say that, but I was going to say, what would be the lesson you'd walk away with there? Here's what I heard. You can tell me if that's what you were indicating, or maybe we could phrase it that way. You have to deal with stuff.
Yeah, the lesson I would take away from the sewer line conflict is primarily communication. Communication with the local agencies, communication with the engineers, communication with your utility group, your right-of-way utility group. Whenever there's a conflict or a change in a utility, whether it be a relocation or some effect on a utility, there is typically a utility agreement that is written by your right-of-way PDT member. And those utility agreements, at least in this case, in this project, were very critical. By the time we got to the point where we were looking at dollars and reimbursing one group or another with the city in that, the folks that were on the project at the time, like myself during construction, didn't have the history that we needed to kind of work through some of those issues. So we needed to interpret that utility agreement the way we thought it was intended to begin with. And it wasn't as clear as it probably should have been. So one of the lessons learned would be make sure that your agreements are very clear, because you may not be the one that's looking at it years down the road, and the folks who are need to be able to understand what the intent was when you wrote it.
How did you discover that hazardous waste was an issue on the project?
We discovered that hazardous waste was an issue on the project in primarily two locations. One was a former gas station property that we thought was cleaned up prior to construction, and we didn't discover that until after construction started, and the contractor was grading and determined that there was contaminated soil from a previous, I believe it was a gas tank that had leaked. So that was the first time. That was very early on in the project, for probably the first couple of months of the project, that ate up a lot of our contingency budget on the construction side. There was another location in a local parking lot that we found probably about 80%, when the contract was about 80% complete. And that particular location was ultimately ended up being the city's responsibility. And the way we figured that out is once it was found, we went back to the cooperative agreement. There again, going back to your agreements, make sure they're very clear on what's stated there and what each party in that agreement will handle. So the second portion in the parking lot was handled by the city, because based on the cooperative agreement, that was their responsibility for the type of hazardous waste that it was.
So resolutions were in that answer, right, Mark? Are you good with that? Very good, yeah. Can you describe the problems that were encountered with the Eubanks property and how those issues were resolved? But I'd like you to avoid using Eubanks, just property owner in general.
Okay. Yeah, there was an issue that we had with a driveway slash roadway on the local road. One of the key elements of the project was to extend a local road to create a parallel capacity to Route 50. And along that local road, there was what we assumed to be was a driveway that connected to that local road. As we found out during construction, the property owner had some concerns on getting access to and from their property. And I believe they thought the intent was that we were going to pave their driveway up to a certain extent. But as we got closer to construction, we determined that there was a change to that driveway between the time that we looked at it during design and when construction started. So then there was the conflict of, is it a driveway or is it a local street, local roadway? Because there are probably 4 or 5 residential properties at the top of this hill that utilize this driveway, if you will. As we went through that issue, we brought surveys out. They took a look at where our actual right-of-way line was, and there was also some concerns about coming out of that driveway and looking at sight distance issues, both to the left and to the right on that local road. We didn't want to create any safety issues with sight distance, but we still needed to provide some type of access without purchasing this road or purchasing additional right-of-way. So the solution on that really was to create a bigger curb cut at that location for cars to come in and out to create better ingress and egress. And then surveys told us exactly where the right-of-way line was, and we paved right up to it and left it. Other than that, that was our fix to that, and there was, in our opinion, no adverse effect to the property owner. We created a safe ingress and egress with sight distance issues, and with the larger curb cut, made it safe access for them.
Great. Did the project meet the need and purpose as defined by the PID?
In my opinion, the project met the need and purpose as defined by the project study report. The sole purpose of this project was operational improvements. We needed to create a way to get through Placerville without stacking up traffic at each of the signals. The solution to that was to create that parallel capacity by extending the local road, which allows local traffic to access one side of Placerville to the other without having to get on mainline Route 50. The other part of that was to widen the structures, the local structures there, to provide a little more capacity at the signals. So from my standpoint, it definitely meets the purpose and need of the project because it allows traffic to circulate easier.
Great. Would you consider the Placerville project a success? Why or why not?
I would consider the Placerville project a success in that it satisfied the purpose and need of the project. Granted, there was a lot of headaches to get to that point between design and construction and the conflict with the sewer and the hazardous waste that we ran into. But ultimately, it satisfied the needs of the community and it satisfied our need on mainline Route 50 to help traffic circulate easier. And so in my mind, that's a successful project.
In your opinion, did this project meet the city's expectations?
In my opinion, it did meet the city's expectations. There was a lot of communication very early on when we were looking at alternatives. And again, I wasn't involved in that part of the project, but just discussing with different people the history of the project. There was a lot of concern with access to downtown and the effect on businesses. One of the alternatives that was considered was a bypass of Route 50 or a bypass of Placerville, of the city, to essentially eliminate the 3 signals there through town. And going to the local community and discussing that with them, the business owners downtown did not want that. They felt that there would be an adverse effect on their businesses because people wouldn't stop to shop at that point. And so it was really a partnership effort to come up with the alternative that was presented and ultimately constructed.
What are you most proud of on the Placerville project?
I would say regarding the Placerville project, I'm most proud of the communication effort that was handled during construction. The resident engineer communicated very well with the city by attending city council meetings on a regular basis, communicated with me on progress, and communicated with the PDT members that we needed to as we were going through the project. So I'm most proud of the communication effort that happened.
Great. Was this a typical project?
In my opinion, the Placerville project was not a typical project. A lot of CalTrans projects, probably most projects, don't have sewer lines involved. They don't have the complexities that the Placerville operational project had. There was not only the sewer line, but there was a creek that runs through town parallel to Route 50. And part of the goal with the sewer line was the existing sewer line ran through the creek. So part of the goal was to pull that out of the creek and create the sewer main. But this is not a typical project. There was a lot of issues involved. There was a lot of local agency involvement that we typically don't do, but need to continue to do that. But I would also caution folks that there is no such thing as a typical project. You may have what I consider, or what I would call, bread and butter work for CalTrans, whether it be an overlay or an operational improvement. but there's no such thing as typical. It might be, you know, normal work that we would typically do, but on a particular location, particular project location, you're going to have unique issues no matter where it is. So in that case, I would caution people to say there is no such thing as a typical project.
We're going to revisit the communication idea, which the questions are phrased slightly different. So it may
Okay.
feel redundant, but I think it's a little different.
Okay.
Please talk about the importance of team communication on this project.
The importance of team communication on the Placerville project can't be understated. There were so many unique issues to this that communication was absolutely critical, and not only internal to CalTrans. You know, you have your normal functional areas within CalTrans, primarily the project engineer, project manager, and during construction with the resident engineer. And you've also got your individual groups such as hydraulics, traffic, right-of-way. But you also need to consider your local partners as part of that team as well, because they've got a stake in the project and they need to be kept abreast of what's going on, project progress, because they've got different issues as well. On this project, you've got a major construction project going through a relatively small local community, and there are elected officials that walk through town on a regular basis and notice, you know, different changes in progress and construction. And they had a lot of questions, and we need to be able to answer those. And so the best way to do that is to bring the local agency in as a team member and make sure they're up to speed on everything that we're doing.
Okay.
I think that makes it easier for construction. It makes it easier to complete the project as a whole when you bring them in early.
How would you characterize the interaction with local stakeholders on this project?
I would characterize the interaction with local stakeholders on this project as very critical. We needed to bring them on board early in order to ensure a successful project. We needed to know their input, their issues, their concerns that we normally wouldn't typically address in a regular project. And bringing them in very early on in the project is absolutely critical. I don't know that I answered that appropriately.
I think that's good. I'm going to ask one more, and then we'll just check in with Mark to see if there's anything else to revisit.
Okay.
What lessons did you take away from this project that have been useful in your career?
Some of the lessons I've taken away from this project that I've used in my career really is, for one, when you come into a project late, make sure you take the time to review decisions and documents that been done previously. Take the time to sit down with previous members of the project, especially the project engineer, since they play a key role in the project. Get familiar with those decisions, get familiar with the documents, get familiar with the scope of work that you're trying to accomplish. Continue with those PDT meetings especially if you've got unresolved issues. If you need to pull together a focus meeting with certain functions or the whole PDT, by all means do that. And if the PDT members have changed or have moved on to other projects, get in contact with their senior or their former supervisor, and don't be afraid to ask questions to resolve the issues. And another lesson learned is bring on the local agencies very early in the project. The earlier you can do that, the more they feel a part of the process, feel a part of the project, and don't feel like they're being run over by CalTrans.
Right. Let me check in with Mark before I have the very last one. But anything you want to revisit, Mark? I think we can, because other folks cover the, say that, so. Okay. Right, so I'm gonna rephrase one of the earlier questions so we can have a general answer. We have a specific possible answer, so now it'll just be in general. The question is, so I lost it. How do the PM and the PE work together on a project? You could rephrase that.
Okay. Well, the project manager and the project engineer work together on a project as really the key project team members. The project manager needs information from the project engineer, such as schedule conflicts, schedule issues, cost issues, whether it be increase or decrease, and scope of work issues. The project engineer certainly needs to keep the project manager up to speed on those types of issues and items during the life of the project, because the project manager's got the big picture of the project goals and project needs. So the project manager needs to know what changes are going to happen to the project based on the project engineer's findings. The project manager needs to communicate the big picture needs to the project engineer, such as budget, cost, schedule, those types of items, so that the project engineer can live within those parameters. They've also, both project engineer and project manager have to communicate with the other stakeholders in the project, whether they're other functional members within CalTrans or local agencies or outside agencies that have a stake in the project. But it also needs to be constant communication and constant discussions about the project and where the project is and where it's headed.
So now I just end with anything else you want to add, any items or issues you want to discuss?
I don't have any items or issues, but I just to reemphasize the need to have the project engineer and the project manager stay in constant communication. If that communication breaks down, then it affects every other part of the project.
Great. Good. Good? We're good? Great. We're good.
Good.